Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Son of Saul from 2015. And this is the winner of my monthly Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Usually to judge most art, as Ebert would say, and a quote I think about a lot from Ebert, regardless of how you feel about him, is a film is not what it is about, but how it is about it. And I think Son of Saul, and the reason for the genius of this film, is how it is about it. Because you are following Saul through basically, I guess, a day in a concentration camp as he tries to find a rabbi to bury, who we're pretty sure is his son, when he finds this child has not died of gas in a concentration camp, the gas showers in Auschwitz. That story in itself, I think, would make a compelling movie. Sounds like something of melodrama and harsh, like a lot of Holocaust things are, but Son of Saul is more about just fixating on the lead character of Saul, and the camera it's at Academy ratio, so it's not, kind of more 4:3-ish, close to that, not exactly. And it's mainly on him, and everything else for the most part of the film is a little more blurred. It feels a lot, oddly, I'd say, like a video game, where an open world video game, and you're mainly seeing everything from his perspective and mainly seeing the horrors of what's going on around him. The film doesn't really focus on the horrors maybe as much as what is going on out of focus behind Saul, which is sort of interesting. And at the same time, I think it kind of speaks to what his perspective is, because I don't know if anyone could truly deal with what was going on at Auschwitz, whether you were there or not, but I think when you're there and in it, and he is part of a certain kind of worker, Commando, I think. I probably didn't say that right, but it'll be down here, who helps out and does other duties. He has to salvage through the clothing of the dead. He has to drag the bodies from the gas chambers. He has to scrub the floors immediately afterwards. He has to do a lot of pretty heinous, horrible things. That's how he finds this kid after he leaves the gas chambers. And then he is killed by a doctor, that boy, but he believes it's to be his son. And you kind of need that determination, and that way it is shot goes into the whole perspective of the film, because he has this idea that he needs to find this rabbi to give his son a proper burial, although he's probably buried and helped destroy so many bodies, like hundreds of bodies a day, probably thousands, if I don't know, countless bodies a day. He suddenly cares about this one boy, and it sort of doesn't matter if it is his son or not. That seems to be sort of a debate, and it does seem a little random, so I sort of don't want that answered for me. I don't want to know if it's his son or not. I don't think that's the point. It's more about him sort of dealing with this, and as his group of workers decides to kind of rise up and retaliate and mutiny and leave the concentration camp, hopefully. All this is going on at once, but you're so following him, it feels like you're playing a video game, and it feels like sort of open world, where people will suddenly come up to him and tell him about certain things, various plot points, and it really does have sort of like a video game logic to it. I don't think you would, unless you know kind of the visual language of video games, I don't think you necessarily, or gaming, understand that. But it has this very intensity to it. It's almost as much as a thriller as it is anything, but it's kind of like a thriller that really puts you there. It's more about kind of the function of how they're telling the story, but also makes you deal with the Holocaust in a way that you like, oh, this is what it would be like to live there and be in it. Certainly no one's going to make a video game of being in a concentration camp. That sounds like a really horrible video game. I'm sure someone in the comments will be like, that Jim, they made that game, and it's this game, and you should have known that. The way like this, to have like an open world, like Vice City type of thing, but you're in Auschwitz, sounds like pretty horrendous, and that's sort of what Son of Saul, I guess, is. But you see the kind of intensity of it. You see the trying to deal with it. You see them even, him talking to his coworkers as they're going through people's clothes, and you see how horrific it is. You hear people clawing and banging against the walls at the gas chambers as he is about to, go through their clothes and, put them in a warehouse so that they can go through them later. It's horrific, but it also says a lot about this director, that he was able to make this film more about this man dealing with Auschwitz and dealing with working within the Holocaust than he was about it showing how brutal it was, and how in a period of history that's kind of been over-examined in film, this is a perspective of it that I felt needed to be seen. And I often find a lot with World War II stuff that we've covered it so much in film that it almost feels like maybe we shouldn't be doing it as much. I think after Inglourious Basterds, it seemed like the air was kind of taken out of the room with that subject, and I think only a film as masterfully done as this film was could really actually kind of answer that in a lot of ways. The director of this, Laszlo Nemes, this is his first film, which is amazingly impressive. It really shows how he kind of feels like a very new, now filmmaker, because he almost understands we know what a lot of these things are. He almost plays off of the idea that we have a background with the Holocaust, so that he can have these scenes of the late night suddenly mass graves, shooting scenario. He can have the gas chambers sequences. He can have all these various parts of Auschwitz and not really need to dwell on them and educate you. He's moving past them in a way that shows a familiarity with it that's probably been shown to you by countless films about the Holocaust you've seen before. But he moves his camera in such a way that it really puts you there, but puts you on the eternal existential torment of Saul, who's played by Gisriel, I think. This is a Hungarian film. The character is a Jewish Hungarian prisoner. The lead actor is a poet and hasn't acted, I think, since the 80s, it said. And he is outstanding. I was kind of like, why haven't I seen him in more stuff in the 3 years since this film's been released? He has a very empathetic quality to his face. Because this film, I've talked before about kind of the storytelling aspects that actors have to take on, but it really very much in his case, because there's a lot of, you need to know his face going on throughout it. You need to know what he's feeling. He needs to project that, or this film is not going to work. You understand when he's going from one thing or another, and what he really cares about despite what everyone is talking about around him, and how he very much wants to get out, but he also wants to find a way to bury his son's body and do it the right way. In a world that doesn't seem to have the right way that he is used to, he still is fighting for that tradition and the correct way he's supposed to do things, even if that seemingly had disappeared at this point. A lot of it is his kind of almost need for decency and order in a world that seems like he could be killed at any time, and this perpetual motion of it. And it's interesting how acclaimed this film is. I find it a really radical way to do this sort of thing. It's probably one of the more radical World War II films we've seen since Inglourious Basterds. Not that it's really comparable at all. I think it's an exciting way to show this period of history when I didn't think that could ever be done. And that says a lot about a director, where you kind of want to just shrug off a genre because you've seen too many people do it the kind of same typical way. And then Laszlo Nemes just drops Son of Saul on us in a way that makes us deal with it in a deeper way, but also kind of shows us that you can still do things, and it's not necessarily the genre or the subject matter's fault that everyone has kind of exhausted all these other ports and functions and ways to do things. He kind of invents a new way to do it, and was interested in learning about these specific workers in Auschwitz and the subject matter and the stories that what happened within these concentration camps, showing it in a way that doesn't overload you. I think a lot of times when you do these historical films, it's more about making sure the audience is educated, and he doesn't seem to care as much about the education of it as he seems interested in the protagonist. And kind of through that, and through his empathy, and through his struggle, and through his quest, you can learn all these things. I think this film understands how important its protagonist is, because I don't think this film would be anything without it. It's really a fascinating film and a thrilling film and a sad film and a depressing film. It's the kind of movie that makes you really deal with the devastation of one of the most horrible concentration camps of all time, but also can show you this man and how he was able to get himself through this, and show you in different perspectives, and be remarkably modern with kind of video game visual language than most films are nowadays, which is kind of interesting. It is radical in a lot of ways, and I think it shows, oftentimes when we pick subject matters about war, it says more about the times we are living in than the times that the film is taking place in. And in this, it kind of shows, how the kind of singular person going through it, and it's not as much about, the supporting actors and everything like that. And I think a lot of this film is very influenced by Alfonso Cuarón and Children of Men, and a lot of the long shots by Emmanuel Lubezki in that. But in Son of Saul, it seems like the whole film is like that, but to even do it in Academy ratio, and the director felt that having it be in a wide aspect ratio wouldn't be respectful. You're supposed to feel claustrophobic and scared and different, and like you're trapped in, and I think he's almost using aspect ratios in our modern interpretation of them. In a lot of ways, this is a very modern film, because if you would play this film for people 20 years ago or something, and there's only VHS, they'd view it as any other movie, and that's not the point of it. The point of the particular aspect ratio is to kind of, bounce away from what we know before it. In a lot of ways, this film works best in relation to other films. So, if you've never seen a Holocaust movie, I actually wouldn't suggest starting here. I still think it is a magnificent film. Like, this is a director who excites me. This is a director who makes me want to deal with this, but also deal with the fact that to go along with this protagonist who, even if I think he's right or wrong, and most of the time I'm not even sure where my allegiances lie with this guy, I still find it fascinating and still find it gripping and thrilling, and also kind of surprised at how much I took away. I feel like I know a concentration camp more through the journey of this film than I've ever seen presented in a film before. It really contextualized it in a way that I think a lot of other films never really have for me. Son of Saul really makes you deal with a lot of things by throwing you in it in a way that most people use to kind of put themselves in more fun settings and make you deal with that in a way to kind of almost force you to think about the Holocaust, while also showing it to you through a guy who's clearly blocked out a lot of those things, who isn't thinking about it. Everyone who's around him is fuzzy and out of focus for a reason, because I don't think he can think about those things anymore, and he needs them to be away from him, and he needs to kind of shut himself off. And I think when he sees that child who wouldn't die in the gas chambers, it opens up something within him, and it makes him try to kind of have feeling again after it's clearly been shut off, for a survival instinct. And it's almost like his survival instinct is to try to find order, even if order doesn't possibly exist anymore and couldn't in a horrible place like Auschwitz was. Son of Saul is probably one of the more remarkable pieces of filmmaking to come out this decade, and it's the kind of remarkable filmmaking that we don't have enough of. It's risky, it's ballsy, it puts you in it in a way, it's atmospheric, it's transcendent, and it's the kind of film that makes you believe that filmmaking can still be alive, particularly with something that you didn't think anyone could breathe new life into anymore. And it kind of shows you, I think that says more about this director and his talents in this movie and what it's trying to put you in, and does it so well, it's almost shocking how well it does. It kind of reinvents the subject matter in a way that I never really thought could have been done anymore. I thought we would have just moved past it, but this film almost demands you deal with it, even if the protagonist doesn't necessarily want to. So if you have seen Son of Saul and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this was the winner of my Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge to my Patreon, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching.